Hello, peace be with you. My name is Chance Wilson. I hope you are having a wonderful day. Today we are going to take a look at an introduction to theology. Now I, of course, am not an authority on the subject by any stretch of the imagination. What I'm doing with this video is reading works that do matter by people who are authoritative. What I'm going to do is take that information and put it in the form of a video so it's more accessible to people. Not word for word, but my own explanation of it. That way the material that's really good and really important is more accessible to you. Specifically for this video, I will be drawing from the Sacra Theologiae Summa, or the STS. This is a Jesuit manual written in the 1950s. It's very long. It's several volumes, depending on which edition you're looking at. It's either 4 or 8. But it is really helpful. It's a really wonderful manual. And many of the authors of the STS actually are celebrated and very important figures in the history of theology. Some of these guys were at Vatican II. There's really a lot of importance to a lot of the authors of the STS. Now, what I'm going to be giving you in this video is from the very first volume, Volume 1A, specifically the first treatise, which is an introduction to theology. Now, I'm planning on doing 3 videos on the introduction to theology. First, this one, which is going to introduce what theology is, its material and formal object, these things. The second video is going to introduce a lot of the distinctions within theology, such as the distinction between scholastic and positive theology, or dogmatic and practical theology, as well as I'm going to introduce the theological places. Those are the places from which we draw argumentation in theology. And then in my third, I'm going to address additional material that wasn't covered in the first 2, things like the authority of St. Thomas, development in theology, and similar issues. Now, the first thing that we have to ask when we begin this introduction is, what is theology? Simple enough. Now, many of us know that theology has something to do with talking about God and religious things, but it's difficult to give a more precise answer than that. The simple answer to the question is that theology is the science of God and divine things. Now, an important note to make when I say that theology is the science of God and divine things is that when I say science, I mean something a little more broad than what is meant nowadays by science. Nowadays, science relates to specifically the hard sciences. People think of science as physics, chemistry, things like that, intellectual disciplines that deal with the material world. But the way that we use science in scholastic philosophy encompasses more than that. It's going to be the systematic study of a thing according to its causes. And cause, in that instance, is going to mean something more than what we often think of with the term cause. Cause here really means any reason that a thing is the way it is. So with theology, if it is the science of God and divine realities, I'm going to look at God and divine realities, and for those realities, I'll question where they came from, I'll question the significance of these things, I'll question how we can understand God, things like this. So that's what I mean when I say that theology is the science of God and divine realities. Now, the primary object of theology is God. Other things that are spoken of in theology are going to be secondary objects. They're going to be considered insofar as they relate to God. So therefore, earthly things can be considered in theology if they relate to God in some meaningful way. That's why we can study man, for example, within theology. His moral life is how man relates to God. Now, theology can be natural or it can be supernatural. Natural theology, which is called theodicy, is going to be the science of God and divine things insofar as they are known from reason. In supernatural theology, on the other hand, we derive our knowledge from revealed principles. So natural theology is going to ascend from created things to God, and supernatural theology is going to descend from these principles of revelation down to how we understand them and apply them. Natural theology, then, is really a branch of philosophy. To be more precise, we would say that supernatural theology and natural theology differ from one another according to their formal object, while they're the same in their material object. The material object of a science is going to be anything that falls within the purview, the domain of that science. Anything that it would treat, anything it would discuss, is within the material object of the science. So with both natural theology and supernatural theology, the material object is going to be God and also other created things insofar as they relate to God. Now, the formal object is going to be a bit different. The formal object is going to be that material object under a certain perspective, a certain light. Often, when we identify a formal object, we'll name the material object, and then we'll say it's that insofar as or inasmuch as blah, blah, blah. So here, the formal object of supernatural theology is God and divine things insofar as they are known through revelation. Whereas for natural theology, the formal object is God and divine things inasmuch as they are known through the light of reason alone. With supernatural theology, if you want, you can get really into the specifics within the formal object. You can talk about how God is being studied under the aspect of deity. Father Garrigou-Lagrange's De Revelatione is actually very good on this, but it's a little outside the scope of this video. Now, the terms matter and form have these very specific meanings within philosophy, and the way material object and formal object relate to one another resembles that relation, and so that's why we use those terms. But if these terms seem a little odd to you, they're not what you're used to, that's okay. Just know for now that these are the terms that we use. So to summarize section 1, what is theology? Well, theology is the science of God and divine things. Natural theology has the formal object of God insofar as he is known from the light of natural reason alone. Supernatural theology, on the other hand, has the formal object of God insofar as he is known through revelation. So now that we know exactly what theology is, we can examine its relation to faith. As we said before, theology is a science. Now, every science has its principles. The principles of a science are those truths which stand at the foundation, the very first level of that science, from which, using the powers of reason and possibly also sense experience, that science draws forth further conclusions and truths. The principles also help establish boundaries for the domain of that science. Now, some sciences have their own principles that they do not take from any other science, such as logic. However, many sciences are subalternate, that is to say, they take their principles from another science. As we have said, the principles of theology are the articles of faith as well as the rest of revelation. These principles are known intuitively and without earthly imperfection by the blessed in heaven. In fact, the knowledge that the blessed have of these things is so much greater and more perfect than the knowledge that we have here, that we establish them as two different sciences. Since the principles of theology are known intuitively and without earthly imperfection by the blessed in heaven, we say that we borrow these principles from them. Therefore, theology here on earth is a subalternate science. We see then that the fact that we have our principles by faith is very important to our understanding of what theology is and how it works. Therefore, theology, properly so called, requires faith. Therefore, the theology done by heretical sects, other religions, atheists, all of this is not really theology. However, the common colloquial usage of the term theology nowadays does incorporate those things, so you don't necessarily need to object if the term is used to apply to them. However, you should understand that the term, in its most proper sense, only applies to Catholic theology. Now, the relation between faith and reason in theology is crucial to not going awry while you try to do theology. Certain men, due to overinflated pride in their own mental capacity, wish to give reason too much credit at the expense of the importance of faith. Those who fall into this error are soundly condemned by Pope Gregory XVI in his allocution Singulare Nos. Now, we have said that the articles of faith and revelation in general are the principles of sacred theology. However, it's important for us to distinguish objective and subjective principles of the science. The articles of faith and the rest of revelation are the objective principles of theology. The objective principles of theology are what we spoke about previously. That's going to be the starting truths of that science. However, there is also the subjective principle in a science, which is the principle whereby it is conducted in us, in our heads. For theology, the subjective principle is reason illumined by faith. Vatican I says, quote, "Reason, illustrated by faith, when it zealously, piously, and soberly seeks, attains with the help of God some understanding of the mysteries, and that a most profitable one, not only from the analogy of those things which it knows naturally, but also from the connection of the mysteries among themselves with the last end of man. Nevertheless, it is never capable of perceiving those mysteries in the way it does the truths which constitute its own proper object. For divine mysteries, by their nature, exceed the created intellect so much that even when handed down by revelation and accepted by faith, they nevertheless remain covered by the veil of faith itself, and wrapped in a certain mist, as it were, as long as in this mortal life we are absent from the Lord, for we walk by faith and not by sight." End quote. The council there quotes St. Paul at the end. We see then that theology is the science of faith. The object of investigation is the doctrine of faith. The objective principles are known only through faith. The subjective principle is reason illumined by faith. At this point, we have a very pressing question, which is, what exactly is faith? For this, we turn again to Vatican I, which says, quote, "Faith is a supernatural virtue, whereby, inspired and assisted by the grace of God, we believe that what he has revealed is true, not because the intrinsic truth of things is recognized by the natural light of reason, but because of the authority of God himself who reveals them, who can neither err nor deceive." End quote. To summarize, faith is that supernatural habit whereby God gives us the power to believe all that he has revealed through his holy church, not based on the power of our reason to come to those things as a conclusion or to even fully comprehend them, but rather based on the authority of God revealing, knowing that he can neither deceive nor be deceived. Now that's going to be a huge part of why Jesus Christ gave us the church, to enable us to come to this faith. Therefore, if you wish to do theology, you must start by learning what exactly the magisterium teaches, since faith is prior to theology. However, following the magisterium is not what defines or constitutes theology, but rather is the first step in doing it. So that's going to be it for our first video on the introduction to theology. In the rest of this series, you can expect to learn more about the different distinctions within theology, the theological places, the authority of St. Thomas, other issues that will complete our introduction. But until then, God bless you and Our Lady keep you.